Hi, I'm Tom Brackett, and I'm glad to be here with you today and to be a part of this experiment. And the name of the gathering is so tempting to be playful, right? So I'd like to start again and say, hi, I'm Tom, and I'm a recovering pyro. Makes me feel really good to be here joining you in conversations around the practices of kindling. So we're hoping that the stories we share and the case studies we offer kindle something new in your heart, like they are in our hearts. And we're hoping that once we finish with this plenary, we can move right into open space where you tell us, with the energy that you show, you tell us what's important next for you. I'm really honored to be here with my colleague, my brother, a mentor in many ways about how to put all of this to work on the ground. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks,
brother,
Tom. Yeah.
Ryan.
So my name's Ryan Marsh, and I'm from Seattle. And I think the chickens are just waking up in Seattle right now. Any other West Coast folks here? Yeah, so if I'm a little slow on the uptick, that's why. And I feel really privileged because, just like sitting around the tables last night, I was talking with Maurice and like some of the work that he's beginning to do with reconciliation in South Africa, and I've talked with others of you. Just amazing stories. All of you have amazing stories. And I get to tell some of my stories up here on this stage. That feels like such a privilege to me. But I'm the abbot at this old place called Rosewood Manor. And when I was just leaving university, I was talking with some friends, and we were just confused about what we wanted to do. And we didn't want to follow the American dream. We didn't want to work in a little cubicle and then go home to a 500 square foot apartment. But we didn't know what we wanted to do. But we knew that the monastics had something going for them. We knew that they wanted to live life well. That was, simply what they wanted to do. They wanted to live in community. They wanted to learn how to share. They wanted to live in rhythms of prayer and in dialogue with God. They wanted to be able to offer hospitality. These were all things we wanted to do. And so we saw this old place, and at the time, windows were broken out, and people were squatting in it, and we said, that's the place right there. So we wrote this little note on a napkin, said, hey, we've got an idea for this old place, and we don't know who owns it, and we'd kind of like to talk to you. And we put it in the mailbox. And then this guy called us a week later and said, oh, yeah, I own that old place. What are you thinking? And we said, well, we'd kind of like to fix it up and live there together in community and in a rhythm of prayer and hospitality and live simply there. And he said, oh, yeah, I was part of a commune in the 70s. I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah, let's do this. So, these 22-year-old folks, we've never really picked up a hammer in our lives. We started working on this place, and we were, each day we were thumbing through the Home Depot books. Okay, that's what we do. Okay, let's go for it. And then people just started joining us, and now it's been 12 years. Feels like just yesterday. When we started, it was just, it was kind of fratty. We'd throw these big parties for the neighborhood, and 300 people would just kind of pile into this old house, and we just prayed that the floors wouldn't give way, And now we have, a 3-month-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, several 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-old in our community. And so there's this kind of intergenerational presence that's really different for us, and we're enjoying that. And there's people who make $10,000 a year, and people who make $100,000 a year, all living in one place. That feels unique. So, fast forward, 2007, we realized that there's something more happening here that more people want to be a part of, and we decided to start Church of the Beloved. I had been working at Church of the Apostles and down in Seattle with Karen Ward, and then kind of found myself a Lutheran all of a sudden. And, she didn't tell me that at first. It was real bait and switch. She said, "You want to come, do this church thing with me?" And I said, "Oh, sure, that sounds great." And then 6 months into it, she said, "Oh, by the way, we're ELCA." I have no idea what that means, but I came to find out. And then some folks back in this neighborhood, some churches up there said, we've been trying to say, y'all come to people under 50,
Yeah.
and the y'all didn't come, and so we'd like to maybe try something different here. And we don't know what it's going to become, but we want to support some people who are doing stuff, and here you go. And so we started Church of the Beloved up here. And I'll show this. I mean, it's kind of hard just to talk about it. I want to show some pictures, right? So here, I'll show a video, and then Tom's going to talk a little bit, and then I'll show some more stories and pictures, okay? But this was one of our hopes. It's just that we'd be able to create a space where we could engage in a holistic kind of faith, where the table of God kind of bleeds into our table, and our table bleeds into God's table, and they kind of fluidly move back and forth.
Ryan, thank you. There's something so beautiful about what you've just shared. And part of my role as a representative of our church center colleagues, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who are here today from the church center and from diocesan leadership teams, grateful I am. Part of my role is to offer the fast-talking disclaimer that includes things like your mileage may vary and check with your doctor and all those crazy disclaimers, right? But I'd like to name something. We all kind of know implicitly, and it feels like it's important to say it out loud explicitly. I get to go home after this, well, across the river to go be with the ELCA after this, but it's my time to tease us, and I include teasing myself around some of these real possibilities here. I'd like to begin by saying, on the backdrop of what we just saw at Church of the Beloved, that there is a tumor that has insinuated itself into our denominational conversations around evangelism and even what it means to be communities of faith. It's a late-stage growth that has metastasized, and it's widespread in our networks and our conversations. I find it, and here's my commitment to you today along with Ryan, I find it a vital practice to be prudent when excising this tumor from our conversations around evangelism and what it means to be the hands and feet of God. Here it is. Let me cut to the chase. The tumor of institutional narcissism. The idea that sneaks into our conversations so surreptitiously that even our immune systems don't know to recognize it anymore. The tumor of institutional narcissism. The idea that we do evangelism for the sake of growing the church. We love to say God's church, God's mission, if we're really being careful here. And that's not why Ryan and I are standing here on this stage in front of you this morning. Ryan and I looked out over you last night and said, any one of you could stand up and talk about what we're going to talk about. So we know we're here in the presence of colleagues, leaders, doing this same work on the ground. And it feels like it's a moment to speak heart to heart with you about what you engage daily. It's a tough conversation to host, I find, when the narcissism has already wrapped itself around the vital organs of our institution. I hope you don't mind me saying it so candidly. And so we run the risk of cutting into the bonds of our mutual affection. We risk cutting each other off in our zeal to clean up our act. In other words, any attempt to explore evangelism for the sake of partnering with the Spirit instead of growing the church, that's a risky venture right now in our Episcopal Church. So we pray for the Episcopal Church and the ELCA, our Lutheran brothers and sisters. We pray for our churches. And let's remember that we're just praying for one or two denominations among many, many, as though it were God's primary venue for evangelism, for building up God's kingdom. We pray these lovely prayers that in their tone are automatically exclusive of all that God does beyond the bounds of what we call sacred. This is this wonderful gift, these beautiful images that Ryan offers us, where you can hardly tell the difference between a formal service and a party where people are loosening up and discovering themselves for who they really are. We call an initiative missional when we want to sell the church on the funding needed. We just call it missional. So now we have missional strategies and missional budgets and missional leaders and missional hubs and missional societies and missional bathrooms we lock. And in the meantime, we have lost so much of the meaning and intent behind words like evangelism. It feels more important than ever to say exactly what we mean, to give examples and to use fresh language. And so this morning I'd like to share with you one of my own core stories. It's a story that doesn't rely on any of the theological language. It doesn't rely on words that we have to learn in seminary. It doesn't require you to be a reverend. And frankly, it's a story that cracks open the prolegomena, the John chapter 1 description of the Word and the Word's function. And it's the Word's origin and the Word's presence among us. It's a story that cracks open this description of Jesus' missional approach to evangelism and formation. So how does John 1 describe Jesus' missional strategy? You might say Jesus chose to not evangelize. You could say Jesus Emmanuelized. Jesus chose to be God with us, Emmanuel. So I have a story that gets close to that choice. And it's a story from not too long ago when my wife and I moved to New England to care for grandparents. And I took on the position of being an executive director of an ambulance company that served 4 little Maine towns, mill towns. And I'd only been there a few months when a scene that would repeat itself many times over happened, where we had a multi-vehicle accident down the road, and all of our ambulances were gone, and everybody was fully engaged in caring for that one, when the dispatcher put out another call to say, we have this new one here, and we need everybody to go. And I was furious. I called her and said, how dare you put out a notice when you know we're already over the limit? We're already overtaxed. There's nobody else to send. She said, yeah, but I still have to let the need be known. So I said, well, okay, sorry. Send an ambulance, and I'll drive it for you. So sure enough, a few minutes later, the snow's piling higher, and the traffic's getting slower, and an ambulance rolls up in front, and I jump in, drive, pull over the hill a few miles up the road, and sure enough, I mean, there were just cars scattered all over this intersection, pointing in every which direction, ambulances and fire trucks and personnel. I mean, it looked like an accident everywhere. And so we pull into the middle of it, and right in the center of it is this one little car, this little Dodge accordion from front end to back end. It was only 7 feet from the front bumper to the back bumper because it had gotten squished between 2 heavy vehicles. And in the middle is one of the town fathers, Bruce. No windows left in his car, completely smashed. No medic around, just us drivers and fire personnel. And Bruce is calling out of his window, still alive and alert, even though the steering wheel is embedded inside his chest and you can hardly see space for him to expand his lungs. And Bruce is calling out, when are you going to get me out of here? When are you going to get me out of here? And we're standing there lined up in front of him because there's just nothing we can do until they get the jaws of life started. And they've been working on it for 20 minutes and they can't get it started. And about that time, a paramedic pulls up, and a basic pulls back from the hospital and shows up, and they start up remember those cell phones that are about like this tall with an antenna that goes up out of the huge thing, and they put it on speaker. It's bigger than our Bluetooth speakers we have today, huge speaker. We can all hear it. And the doc's coming on, and the doc says, well, give me a situation update, give me the vitals. We check Bruce, and he's fine, he looks good. And then we notice his eyelids are starting to droop a little bit more as time goes on. And he's still saying, when are you going to get me out of here? But it's getting fainter by the minute, just fainter. When are you going to get me out of here? Doc says, give me the vitals again. So we take the vitals, and you can tell he's going down. He's, as they say in EMS jargon, he's circling the drain. It's bad. And he's still asking, when are you going to get me out of here? And so right at that moment, as the doc is asking for that last set of vitals, this loud engine starts up about 5 feet away. They finally got the jaws of life started. And right after that, the big metal saw starts up, these really loud 2-cycle engines. And the doctor yelled, I don't know if he knew or not, but he yells out, what's that sound? And we explained to him, it's the jaws of life. And he said, stop, I want silence. Well, it took a little while because we had to go like this to the fire chief he's not used to being told what to do on an accident scene like this. Now the medic has to go around to him and say, no, the doc is in charge, and he says he wants silence, so shut it off. A couple minutes go by, and they finally get it all silent, and the doc says, stop everything. And then he says, there has to be a better way. Well, I was new to the industry, just moved from Atlanta. I had no idea about wilderness EMS. I had no idea that they knew that if they cut Bruce out of the car, he might make it for 4 minutes, and they had a 25-minute commute, that the car was literally holding him together while we figured out what to do. We had no idea that the steering wheel was actually embedded in him as his salvation. There was no moving Bruce in that moment. The doc knew, the medic knew, the fire department and we had no idea. We wanted to give Bruce what he wanted. Doc says there has to be a better way. So now we're all lined up, hands in our pockets in the snow with the traffic going silently behind us. And the only sound we hear is Bruce asking for the 100th time, "When are you going to get me out of here?" And we stand there in silence like we were told. And then, to our surprise, Tom, the senior paramedic, twists his belt buckle and throws his EMS belt into the snow. And he shuffles around to the other side of Bruce's car where there's only broken windows left. And he's as wide as he is tall. He goes around to the other side and he starts wiggling himself into the window, through the window, to sit in what's left of a passenger seat on the other side of Bruce. And as he's going in, you can hear him yelling out past Bruce, "Somebody hand me an IV line," as he wiggles his legs through and scrunches around and finds his way to sit there in the passenger seat. And so one of the medics comes over and starts passing the line through, and as they do, the fire department guy closest to us says, "I've got a heater." And he goes around behind his truck and he gets some duct tape and a heater and he puts it behind the headrest where right behind Bruce. And while he's doing that, no words exchanged, no deals made, no plan made whatsoever. The doc's still listening. Two of the fire department guys go around to the back of their truck and they pull out this giant roll of saran wrap. And they try it at the back of the car and they pass it over the roof and they try passing it underneath, but the muffler's still hot and it melts the plastic, so they had to take it off and they start wrapping it around the sides. And they begin creating a cocoon around Tom and Bruce and the IV line hanging from the wrecked roof. And they begin closing up the windows that were smashed out just to keep it warm in there for the heater. And by then, the photographers are showing up. And the last shot they took, looking past the window where Tom's holding up the IV line and starting a needle, the last shot they take, looking past Bruce, looks actually out through the car, the other side. And in the background are the two brand new ambulances that just showed up while all of this was going on in silence. The last wrap of saran, another medic shows up. Joe starts making these strange hand motions, like going like this through the snow. You can just barely see that there's one tow truck left. And on the side it says in hand-painted letters, I swear he did it with a leaf or something crude, but it just says, "Joe's Wrecker Service." It's rusted wrecker service. It's a flatbed, tilt-bed truck, and it barely looks like it has enough life in it to get off the intersection. But he backs it up, and Joe makes these hand movements, and the tow truck driver starts lifting the bed. And by the time the last saran wrap goes around, they hook the car up and start pulling it onto the back of the tow truck. By now, town fathers are out there looking to see what's going on, and what they see is Tom and Bruce in a wrecked out car, saran wrapped on the back of a rusted tow truck, about to head north to the hospital for a 25-minute drive. And we all fall in behind. Old cars, new cars, paramedics in their cars, brand new ambulances follow up, and we get there. The doctors prepared the way, and for the first time in a long time, they unbolt the bay doors leading to the ER. They spread the doors wide enough, and the tow truck driver backs his truck with the car on the back into the ER. And for the first time anyone can remember, the doc begins surgery inside Bruce's car while they're cutting it away around him, and secures the artery that's been bleeding out inside him so that they can lift him out of the car with metal everywhere, metal filings, pieces of car, just total demolition derby in the ER. They lift him out, they put him on the gurney, they finish surgery in a sterilized suite, and Bruce is alive. Bruce is alive. Can I tell you that Bruce actually outlived one of the paramedics that served him that day, who was younger than he is? Bruce is alive. And I share with you this story because the fallout that came from hauling Bruce to the hospital on the back of a rusted tow truck, when we could have used an ambulance and stuck with protocol, the fallout was horrible. We lost our licensure. Our insurance was provisional. We had to go on a provisional license. We had to go through state, regional hearings on. The huge question was, if we allow this, what's next? How does text sample translate those words from John chapter 1? And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I will never hear those words the same way again after watching Tom wiggle his way into the car window and through the window to the seat next to Bruce. I'll never hear them again when I remember a few weeks later we interviewed Bruce once he got back home again. He was in recovery, and I took Tom and the medics with me, and we asked Bruce what was it like, and he said, I really can't remember a whole lot. As you know, I was unconscious, and we were really worried for you, Bruce. We're so glad you're alive. And he said, yeah, I had this strange thing happen. As soon as I closed my eyes and I lost consciousness, this angel came to me, big, bright, white presence, started speaking in my ear. Bruce, don't give up. Bruce, you're going to make it. It's going to be okay. We were silent. Tom jumps up off the sofa next to Bruce and he says, that was no angel, that was me. I was so afraid you were going to die on the way to the hospital, and how would I explain it to our insurance company that we had you in the back of a rusted tow truck? That was me. He says, you were an angel. I'll never hear those words again. The Word became flesh and pitched tent among us. So I want to offer you a couple of premises that I hope will fuel our conversations together in open space after Ryan wraps up our sharing here. Sometimes I believe that breaking protocol is our primary access to God's future being birthed among us. We began measuring everything differently after that moment there in Jay, Maine. We didn't measure how many trips we made to the hospital. We started measuring how many lives survived trauma 6 months, a year out, 18 months later. How many people were still alive? How many families had been transformed by the way we intervened in their moment of crisis? In interviews, Tom explained to us that he had no plan, that frankly it was only his love for Bruce. They'd known each other since childhood. It was his love for Bruce that motivated him to crawl into that car. I want to say, sometimes I think going to church gets in the way of the transformation. Sometimes we send people off to church and they'll never make it there because church is not their thing. Sometimes we say, if you just get them in the back of the ambulance, we could save them. Or at least our protocol tells us that's the way to deal with it. So I have some questions, and Ryan has them on a screen for us to linger with here. How do we prepare leaders to be present to the uncertainty that Spirit calls all of us to face in our times? How do we prepare leaders to stand in front of Bruce and not give Bruce what he wants, but to be still and know that there has to be a better way? How do we teach our leaders the disciplines that doctor lived into, where he needed to know what was going on and offer his very best, but at the same time not tell them exactly how to respond to Spirit's leadership in that moment? And here's another one. What does it look like to pitch tent out in the world for the sake of love, even when the church finds this offensive, or worse, pointless and unsustainable? What does it mean to be a tent-pitching community that is organized around belovedness rather than sustainability or vitality or missional ethos, as all those terms are being misused today? And how do we learn to receive the gifts of the loyal dissident? Tom put his career on the line. Tom said, for the love of Bruce, that can all wait. Tom had definite choices. He could have stuck with protocol and said, sorry, Bruce, we got to get you in that ambulance. It's the prescribed method of grace. Diana Butler-Bass stood with us a year ago in an ecumenical gathering much like this in Chicago, and she asked us, what are you willing to give up for the sake of the future? Several of us stood up and we said, well, Diana, we think that's only half the question. We can't engage it. We'd rather that you would ask, what vision of our shared future compels you to crawl into the broken out windows of our communities? What glimpses of the Spirit's dreams wake you up at night, calling from you your most persistent self? If you start with that, we're willing to give up a whole lot. Ryan's going to take us down the path of practicality in local community. Ryan?
Gosh, Tom, I love that story. And, our community is largely made up of angry ex-evangelicals. Do we have any of those in the house tonight, this morning? Yeah, right? That alumni category for church is really large. And so to speak of, someone's witness is a bad word, so we speak of witness.
Oh, nice.
And more and more we're thinking of evangelism, good newsing, as faithful presence. And that's the type of space that we're trying to create. So here's our Wednesday night meal. You never know who from the neighborhood's going to be at dinner on Wednesday nights, who's going to show up. Could be anyone knocking on the door that night. And I asked the community, the 12 of us that actually live there in the house, what do you want me to tell these folks? And they said, to do your chores. This is just the nuts and bolts of, these are kind of some of the questions that people always ask. Well, like, how do you live together with all these people? Oh my gosh. Well, part of, like, a really important part of it is this chore wheel right here. And famously, Dan, who was one of the first housemates, famously, he said one Wednesday night meeting, he said, hey, what's going on in here when we don't do our chores? So this is this is something we repeat often. What's going on in here when we don't do our chores? And so we kind of, my son thinks it's weird that other people don't live in their churches, because that's all he's ever known, right? And so he's kind of like, well, what goes on there the rest of the time? I mean, what goes on in those buildings the rest of the time? Well, I don't know. Sometimes nothing for long periods of time. Well, that's just weird, because this is kind of what he's used to, is these big community meals and game nights and neighborhood concerts and art exhibitions and readings and plays happening in his living room. He's going to need lots of counseling, and I'm willing to pay for that. And here's some shots from our garden in the back, where neighbors come and garden with us. And there's the chickens just waking up over there too. And then on Sundays at 4:36, the living room becomes what it already is, a sanctuary. And here's some shots from our Easter service, the Easter uprising.
I love it.
We craft all of our liturgies together in small guilds, where people we start with the fourfold pattern. We start with the lectionary text, and then we branch out from there into our experiences. And okay, well, what poetry, what film, what stories, where does this resonate into you? And that's how we craft things. Here's the blessing of the bikes down here, and the drum circle up top, and the front steps crumbling away over there.
Nicely used.
Yeah, the Feast of St. Francis. Neighbors brought their pets. This was something we did during Holy Week, the Way of the Cross. We had 12 painters, sculptors, mixed media folks who each did a station of the cross. And we set up this exhibit in a community center nearby. And then they put on these headphones where we had written songs and did kind of theatrical readings for each of the stations. And it was designed in a labyrinth, so they walked a labyrinth and experienced all this different art. There's our beer and hymns, kind of our quarterly event here. The pig roast this time. And here's a little story. I wrote this up, so I'll read it here. What is this? The woman stared down at our Church of the Beloved table with this puzzled look. We were handing out candy at Edmonds Main Street Halloween party, along with the rest of the Edmonds businesses. But we also offered something unique, something that was kind of very us, a bowl of sand with tall, skinny candles. Well, tomorrow is All Saints' Day, I told the woman. And that's why we call tonight All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. So if you want, you can light a candle here and pray thanks for someone important to you. And she looked intently at the bowl of sand. She said, well, how much? How much? I was puzzled. Well, it doesn't cost anything. It's free, I said. And then she quickly took a candle and she lit it. She placed it in the sand. And then she stood there looking at it for a minute, and she began to tear up. And she said, thank you. I guess I needed to do that. And for some, this was their first time praying. They would ask, what do I say? Kind of like Jason was talking about. And I said, it's easy, I assured them. Just say thank you to God, like you would to anyone who's given you a really good gift. And it was the kids that seemed to like it the most, really. These little pyromaniac boys were more excited about the prayer station than about the candy that we were handing out. And running up, yeah, just like you. Running up to their parents, they would yell, Mom, can I light a prayer candle? Can I? Can I? And at one point, we had about 16, 17 kids all gathered around this little bowl of sand praying prayers with their parents and their guardians behind them. And Ken would ask them, hey, so who'd you pray for? And after they stuck their candle in the sand, my grandma's dog, my uncle who died, my dad who's in the war. Last night, God was showing us a different way to love our neighbors. This was a really transformative experience for us as a community. Because we weren't offering like a harvest alternative to Halloween. We weren't asking people to come into our church domain. We were joining with the established expression of our neighborhood in the public marketplace, alongside businesses and community services. And there on common ground, we offered our unique way of serving Edmonds, our town. There's nothing confrontational about it. It was what our neighborhood was desiring, and it was what we had to offer, a moment of prayer and gratitude that flowed in and out of the party that was surrounding us. And by the end of the night, all of us from Church of the Beloved, we'd handed out over 3,000 pieces of candy, and over 200 candles had been lit. And we were convinced that God is alive and at work in Edmonds, and certainly on Halloween. Yeah, so this has become a little tradition for us. And then I'll leave you with one idea that we hope to do next. You can see like a lot of what we do is not programmatic. Like there's no programs at Church of the Beloved. Because programs usually arise because someone on staff says, we should do this. Who will do this thing? And then we work really hard to keep it afloat, right? And so we try to do this reverse osmosis here where we say, okay, where's the gospel resonating in you? What's the, we're just a vocational support group here. So, what's the Spirit doing in you? Okay, we want to gather around that, And one night we were at the pub after service, and we were talking about, you remember that thing, Post-Secret? You remember this?
Yes.
Right? We were thinking, oh, remember that? Oh, yeah. That's so fascinating. We thought, man, well, wait a second. There's something kind of icky about it that feels icky about it to us, where people kind of anonymously post secrets, and then we all kind of stare in at it, and nothing. It's kind of like confession with no absolution, no relationality, Yeah. Oh, that's kind of icky in some ways. It's kind of cool in some ways, kind of icky in some ways. Well, what if we, we're always like trying to wonder, like, well, how do we better pray for our neighbors? Well, what if we did this? It's kind of like post-secret, where, you mail something in, you write something on the back of a postcard, you mail it in. But what if it was a prayer that we just said, what we're saying now? We're wondering how to pray for our neighbors. We thought we'd ask you. And then they could mail it in, and we'd pray for them. So this is, I think, our next project, our next experiment. We do lots of experiments where it's just okay to fail, Yeah. So these are some thoughts. Do you want me to go back to that first slide with the questions?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
On the way back to that slide, I invite you to just be still for a second and do a little bit of a spirit check with yourself. Just be present to what's going on inside you right now. And here's what I invite you to consider. If you could think of your heart response as kind of an index of responsiveness to the pieces that we've shared with you so far, how much of your response is still anticipating the institution's response to what we've been sharing? Can I ask that? Is that okay to ask here? I know that many of you are living in the in-between spaces. Many of you represent the best of the institution to the world around you. High calling, right? Hard work, right? And So I want to ask you, how much of your soul energy, your CPU processing energy, what percentage is still given to anticipating the institution's response to the pieces that we've shared with you so far? I want to offer an embracing response to that reality with you and invite you to be compassionate with yourselves as you inhabit that netherworld between the outcroppings of institutional narcissism and your soul's passion for God's mission in the world. And I know I'm being bold to pit them against each other. And it doesn't help any to, quote unquote, put them on a continuum, right? That's a politically correct way of describing two very big forces at odds with each other inside most of us at most of the time. So I want to be present to that and say, how compassionate can you be in the space where we have to acknowledge we're not there yet? There are whole pieces of our institution that are dying and falling off. And there are people who are prematurely grieving the loss of something that we were all really ready to get rid of in the first place anyway. And you know your story, your mileage may vary locally there on that claim. But I want to be really candid with you and say, part of our reality here in this room right now, represented by each of you, is that you've chosen to live in that tension if you're working with young leaders, young adults. You've chosen to live in that tension. The witness that Ryan and Church of the Beloved are offering is very much in that tension. They're not saying now everybody should go to an intentional community and worship in a house church setting. They're saying we need both. And there are some whom, if you sent them to church, they'd never get there because it's not their thing. But if you invite them to a meal where stories are the bread and wine of our shared fellowship, oh, now they'll get there. And they don't have to be stripped out of their lives and join in a sterile ambulance environment to find redemption. They can bring their wrecked out lives to the dinner table and find that they're in good company. Now that does set up a tension. It sets up a tension for people who are unabashedly Episcopalian and unabashedly Lutheran and trying to recover reasons to have sort of a sense of tribal pride in who we are in our religious identity. And we espouse really wonderful mythical terms like ethos, as though that were known to everybody, you know? Let's honor the ethos. I'm kidding here. I hope you can see I'm grinning inside, at least some on my face as well. But as Diana asked a little while ago, not too long ago, a year ago, she said, what are you willing to give up? And I want to say, yeah, but did I tell you Bruce is still alive? Bruce made it. What are you willing to give up to see the Bruces make it more consistently? And so we're offering you these questions as a way to be present to the practicalities. So for example, how do we prepare? How do we teach? Can we give examples of pitching tent? Brian's is beautiful, down-to-earth, on-the-ground reality of pitching tent in Edmonds, Washington. What does it mean to be tent-pitching community that is organized around belovedness? We talked about it last night. Belovedness as high calling rather than the archaic measures of vitality, sustainability, and so forth. And then how do we learn to receive the gifts of the loyal dissident? So for example, when Wilderness EMS training, Solo for example, started creating their curriculum, they said, what if we started welcoming people of different abilities to join us in this work for the sake of improving outcomes? Really powerful way of thinking about curriculum development for Wilderness EMS when they first began 15 years ago. What if the church caught on to that and said, what if we allowed outcomes to shape our polity and our process and our structures? I think we struggle with distrust. And I think what you all are embodying here is our confidence, Mike's confidence, that everything we need is right here in this room, which is one of the basic tenets of open space technology. It says the people who show up are the ones who needed to show up. It lasted as long as it was supposed to last, and we invite you to vote with your feet. Because there's Harrison Owen's understanding is that if we trust Spirit in you as well. I was talking to Ryan yesterday, and I realized recently that Zipcar trusts people more than the Episcopal Church does.
Oh, God.
Isn't that amazing? What an invitation. What if we said, no, wait a minute, you didn't hear any different spirit than I did when you said yes to the Spirit's call. It may have looked a little different, but it's the same Spirit. You show us the basic fruits of the Spirit, and we have every reason to have confidence in what comes out of your life. What if we made that Galatians 5 our ethos? What if our reputation was not amazing liturgy, but the most widespread movement of the fruits of the Spirit you've ever seen? What if we reassessed everything we were doing on the basis of our long-term impact on the larger community around us? What if we assessed each of our liturgies, each of our worship gatherings, every time we share a meal, on the long-term impact it had, not only for those present, but those influenced by those present? How would that shift us and the way we relate to each other in gatherings like this? I think we would come hungry. I think we'd look at images that Ryan just shared with us, and we would tell our hearts, stop evaluating it on the basis of a parochial report. Stop checking it out, tricking the soul on the basis of how it might work in your community if you just took everything he did and transplanted it like some Acme church-in-the-box approach to doing real community. I think it would also give us a deeper appreciation for difference, for variance, instead of sublimating it or insisting on conformity. What do you think? Our time's almost up. We have like 7 minutes, and I'm wondering, Ryan, do you have any last words?
Well, yeah, I mean, we come to these conferences, and we meet new people, and so we give our stump speech, right?
Yeah.
About where we're from and what that's like, And I look at this, I look at what I showed here, and I go, oh my gosh, I want to be a part of that church.
Me too.
Right? Because it's just our profile, it's our Facebook profile up here, It just looks beautiful and wonderful. But I know that's your not experience. That's not my experience of doing it. This is really hard work that you're a part of, that you're doing. And I know some of you are in transition too. You're like, gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I feel the same way. I'm kind of like, we've been doing this for 12 years as a residential community and for 8 years as a worshiping community. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know what's next for me. I know it's got to be something, but I look at this and I think, gosh, this isn't perfect, but is there some other place for me in the church, in the world? Like, I have no idea. I don't have an imagination for it yet. So I know some of you are in transition too. And I just wonder, afterwards, maybe you want prayer. I sure need prayer around this. Maybe you need discernment around this. And so I would like to offer that as kind of a space for prayer, because this is hard. Oh my gosh, this is hard. You have to wear 1,000 different hats. You don't feel qualified for any of them. I know that's my experience every day. So if you want to pray with me afterwards, I would like to do that too.
Ryan, thank you. I want to be a part of that kind of community. Yeah. So part of what we're offering, I'm trying to ban the word "so" at the beginning of a sentence. Sorry about that. So bear with me as I catch myself here. Part of what we're offering is the space for you to engage around what's important to you. So Mike has called us to come together around possibilities. And if you have an idea or a passion around a topic, you offer it to the community. It's a giveaway. You say, I'm interested, if you want to join me, come meet me over here. And they're going to help us with those logistics in just a moment. When you come together around that person, it's helpful to have somebody tracking the movement of the Spirit in your conversation. They're harvesting, you could say. And then you have somebody who's sort of guarding the circle, hosting the conversation, paying attention, making sure everybody has a voice. Nobody speaks too much longer than the other one next to them. We go all the way around, make sure everybody has a chance to talk before somebody talks twice. And we try to stay close to the calling question. If we choose not to, then let's illuminate another question and pay attention to the 3 primary factors in the small group. There's the need that brought us together, or the invitation or the inquiry. There's the timing of our conversation, how long it's going. And then finally, the third one is the energy. When the energy wanes, it's usually a sign to move on. So don't pay much attention to the spurious energies and the wild excitement and the moments of illumination. Pay attention to the group's overall energy and listen into the center of what's transpiring in your conversation together. A little bit of a different discipline. So Ryan and I are going to pause here, knowing that we get to come and hang out with you and have much more interaction back and forth. And we're staying the whole day, so we hope to be available later this afternoon as well.